In this video, we're going to be exploring topic 8.9, solid waste disposal. Solid waste includes everything that isn't a liquid or a gas. It's materials that you produce in your homes, as well as schools and businesses, agriculture, industry, and even hospitals that need to be disposed of. Collectively referred to as municipal solid waste, or MSW, the material moves from location to location through what we call a waste stream. Ultimately, the waste reaches its final destination, such as an incinerator or a landfill or perhaps even a recycling plant. Occasionally, though, waste does end up in less than desirable places or maybe even dumped illegally. The composition of municipal solid waste includes a variety of materials, oftentimes stuff that's potentially recyclable or compostable. This diagram here illustrates the kinds of materials that we find in municipal solid waste. As you can see in the diagram on the left, the vast majority there, 64% of it, is potentially compostable. Some of it in the plastics category, the metals category, and the glass category may also be recyclable. The diagram on the right illustrates the sources of that municipal solid waste. Durable goods includes things like appliances, food and yard waste is pretty self-explanatory. Now, this municipal solid waste, most of it ends up in landfills. This is information from 2014 from a site that tracks the kind of waste that we produce in the United States. And as you can see, just over half of the waste that we produce ends up in landfills. So let's take a look at what a landfill is and how they function. Landfills, oftentimes referred to as sanitary landfills, are the most common method for disposing of municipal solid waste. They're essentially big holes in the ground, and into those holes we throw our trash. A little bit more complex than that, though. When we describe a landfill as being sanitary, that means that it has features that allow groundwater surrounding it to be protected from contamination, as well as a system that we use to collect the methane that's produced as that waste decomposes. Now, the decomposition of the waste within a landfill is going to vary depending on the type of material, as well as oxygen availability and water availability. Obviously, certain materials like glasses and plastics and metals aren't going to decompose as fast as paper products or food waste will. The absence of oxygen in many landfills also slows down the process of decomposition and results in the production of methane. Now we're going to watch a short video that was produced by Waste Management that will illustrate how landfills are constructed and how they're managed.
Finding a suitable site for a landfill can be complex. Landfill operators will work with regulators to be sure the new facility is located in the right place. Some places, like properties near wetlands, will be carefully evaluated for any environmental concerns. Impacts on nearby traffic will be analyzed. The site will also be evaluated to understand the land, groundwater, and surface water in the vicinity. Community feedback is important to consider, and meeting environmental and land use standards are a must. Once the site is approved by the regulator, the first step is to follow permit plans for sound construction. The second step is to secure the base of the landfill to provide a stable base for the liner. A two-phase composite liner is installed on the base and sides of the landfill. Leachate, a natural occurrence when waste is in contact with water, is collected through a system of drains, pumps, pipes, and hoses that move leachate away from the landfill. The leachate collection system will act as an effective biological filter by removing excess moisture from the bottom of the landfill. A groundwater monitoring system is installed to ensure the landfill does not impact groundwater at the site. The monitoring system acts as an alert in case additional measures may be needed to protect neighboring properties. Groundwater quality is protected at all times. Access to the site is carefully controlled for safety, and waste is screened by appropriateness as required. The landfill is ready to receive waste that has not been recycled. equipment compacts the waste each day before daily cover, soil or tarps, is placed to avoid potential littering and odor. Gas wells are installed to capture methane generated by the waste. Once full, the landfill is covered with a cover system approved by the regulator. Groundwater continues to be monitored, and methane gas is collected and destroyed or turned into energy or fuel. When the landfill stops accepting waste, regulators will approve its closure and will monitor its safety for 30 years or as required by the regulators. Then, controls will be put in place to keep the property secure for the future. The property surrounding a closed landfill can be used for commercial or industrial use. But commonly, the property is used for green space, suitable for recreation or habitat conservation. We strongly support wildlife habitat conservation at our landfills through our partnership with the Wildlife Habitat Council.
Now, in the realm of waste disposal, electronic waste, or e-waste, is a special category all to its own. Even though our electronic waste makes up only a portion of the total waste stream, the fact that those products, like cell phones and computers and televisions, contain toxic materials, their disposal needs to be handled in a different manner than simply dumping it into a landfill. The presence of toxic materials, including heavy metals like lead and mercury and cadmium, mean that their disposal in a landfill could potentially contaminate groundwater supplies, so that they need to be disposed of in a different process. Unfortunately, the recycling of these materials oftentimes is cost prohibitive, so they end up being disposed of in an improper way, or they end up being shipped off to places where people are desperate to earn a living, oftentimes in developing countries. That ends up meaning that the people that are disposing of and processing our electronic waste usually don't have the personal protective equipment or protective measures in place so that they don't come in contact with toxic materials. Now, there is an international treaty called the Basel Convention on the Control of Transboundary Movements of Hazardous Wastes and Their Disposal, or simply the Basel Convention, that was first introduced in 1989 and opened to signatures by countries in 1992, that's supposed to prevent more affluent nations from passing off their waste onto less affluent nations. As of 2018, 186 countries, as well as the entire European Union, have signed and ratified this international treaty. There are still, however, 2 countries that have yet to ratify the treaty, and that includes Haiti and the United States. Now, another thing that we do with waste is we burn it, waste incineration. As an alternative to burying trash in landfills, the volume of the waste can be reduced by incinerating it. Depending on the efficiency of the waste incinerator, the volume of that waste can be reduced by as much as 90%. That would save large amounts of space within the landfill, extending the life of the landfill. Unfortunately, burning the waste, as you could probably imagine, does have some side effects and consequences. One of which is the release of ash or particulates into the atmosphere. And then, of course, we know that all combustion reactions release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. One really sort of neat thing that we can do with waste incineration is we can use the heat generated by burning that trash to heat up water, to make steam, to turn a turbine, to turn a generator, to generate electricity. So this diagram illustrates the process by which waste is incinerated. Essentially, straightforward dumping of waste into a bunker that would then be lit. And then there are different methods in place to capture as much of the ash material as possible, like in this diagram, that baghouse filter being illustrated. Now, the next category is toxic waste. Now, toxic waste is identified as such because it cannot be simply disposed of in a sanitary landfill. It needs to be processed using special methods or recycled using special techniques to ensure that the toxic nature of their contents is not released out into the environment. Now, some of the most common toxic materials that you may be familiar with include things like batteries, car batteries, tires, appliances, and even paint. None of these things can be disposed of directly into a landfill, so instead they need to be broken down into their components. Like, for example, the copper or other metals could be removed from them and recycled, or the plastics or the glass could be removed from them and recycled and then disposed of properly. Products that contain chemicals in them would need to be treated to prevent animals and plants from being exposed to them. The last thing I want to talk about is trash in the ocean. It's unfortunately not uncommon in some places for the disposal of waste into the sea. And that's because it's a really quick way of getting to an out of sight, out of mind sort of position. If you don't see the trash, it's no longer a problem. But this tactic obviously has led to large volumes of trash floating in the ocean and endangering wildlife. The most famous of this is probably the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It is the most conspicuous example of the kind of harm that's being done by dumping trash directly into the ocean. We're going to take a look at a short video from 60 Minutes that will illustrate the idea behind this a little more clearly.
What we think it is?
So the Great Pacific Garbage Patch really is a misnomer. It's not a patch. It's not a mass. It's nothing you can see from space. All these things once heard, but in fact it's just a giant soup, a gyre, a whirlpool of plastic in the ocean at various depths. So it's not as if you can stand on this garbage patch. It's not an island of garbage.
Just to the north of these islands lies a convergence zone of currents that cause plastics to accumulate in that area. When I went through it on my own sailboat, I saw lots of things floating in the water. A large derelict fishing net, a ghost net, or I might see a bottle or a crate. And then also you have stuff like sticks and wood also collecting in this garbage patch. Even if the debris isn't a floating mat of trash, even if it's more dispersed than that, it can still hold an enormous amount of plastic.
Even if you're in the middle of the garbage patch, you often can't see the plastic because it's below the surface.
But that's not all of it. It's only part of what's in the garbage patch. They're very small fragments of what were bigger pieces of plastic.
Plastics that are in the ocean are exposed to a lot of different factors. They're exposed to ultraviolet radiation from the sun, they're exposed to wave action, they're exposed to reefs and rocks, sand, and so there are a lot of things that are contributing to these plastics breaking down into smaller pieces.
You know, the plastics spread out. It's under the surface. It's not an easy thing to mop up. If it were a garbage island, I think it probably would be much easier to clean up.
Well, that pretty much does it for topic 8.6. Thanks for watching. See you in the next video.